Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 40k Fireside Podcast. I'm David Gaylord, and I'm joined by my good friend Vic Vijay. Together, we discuss 40k and the meta from our perspective, along with events we've recently been to and those that have got coming up. So come on down to the fireside and listen. Hello there, and welcome back to the 40k Fireside Podcast. Vic and I have landed back in the United Kingdom, back from Las Vegas. We're here with episode number 12. We're feeling refreshed. We took a couple of days after getting back to just, get used to the jet lag and hang out a little bit. And I think we're in a good space now to decompress. A bit of cathartic episode for us. Maybe a bit of ranting. But we're going to try and balance out the negatives with some positives at the same time. And I think for this episode, Vic and I were just discussing, we're going to chat through chronologically the tournament for us. So starting with probably the pre-tournament with myself, and then day one and day two, and then kind of some positives and negatives with the tournament that we realized going on throughout it, and then we'll chat about the final day as well, even though none of us made the finals. But yeah, Vic, anything you want to say before we get started?
Yeah, man. I mean, this was the last event of the season. Technically, the ITC season ends on Las Vegas Open, and then we kind of get our final rankings for the year, and the new season starts from here. So this event is kind of the culmination of the entire year, and we can maybe spend a moment just to reflect on everything, and thank you guys for tuning into all of our episodes, which we've grown with each episode, and this is coming up to episode 12, so we've done 12 episodes in this season, bro. And we should be doing, I think, probably a few more in next season, because we only started halfway through this one.
Yeah, for sure. I think we'll still keep like the roughly every 2 weeks schedule, although we might try and diversify with some episode links. So if we have like a shorter episode, which heads up, the one after this is going to be a short little take on Arcs of Omen. So we'll try and release some shorter episodes to mix it up a little bit, kind of takes the stress off Vic and I recording and one like that as well. But before we get started, since you mentioned it was the end of the season, what was your favorite moment of the whole season?
Ooh, favorite moment.
Really putting you on the spot.
Favorite moment. That's a really interesting one, man. I think probably my favorite moment was a game. And I think my favorite game of the season was the semi-finals of, Leicester against Nassim. Nassim, brilliant Tau player, really, really like big talent in the UK, and we had an awesome semi-finals game where it was my T-Suns versus his Tau, and it was really tactical, and halfway through, we both realized where everything was going, and we just had such a laugh. No matter what was at stake there, at the end of the day, we're just friends, and that game epitomized us just being friends. So that was my highlight, bro. What about you?
Best part about 40k. About me, I wasn't as an accomplished player as you, of course, going into it, but probably winning my first Super Major feels really good to get that one under the belt, and playing Tyranids, I think, in general was a blast. So, yeah, winning my first Super Major, I played Danny Everson in the finals, where we had two very different lists, and that, to me, was just the epitome of the list advantage or list strength, where I was playing full Leviathan Warriors against Danny, who was playing more of like a monster-based Exocrine list, and I just that was at the point where nothing was really figured out. So I had cracked onto the like almost optimal list very quickly. So I got to flex a little bit in that final, so that felt really good.
Yeah,
as well.
Great achievement there. And we both had some great achievements this season, and I just want to give a shout out to the UK scene in general, who I think put up a great showing across this entire year. Our scene has grown so much, and I have a feeling that next year we might see a few more people travel over to some of our events, which is something I would wholeheartedly recommend to any of you international listeners, because especially, and we'll go into it in more detail, but I have a feeling the quality of our events is really, really high class. So I'm sure if you do come over, you'll really enjoy it.
And you'll have a great time. And before I forget, shout out to a special person who donated a box of chocolate to Vic and I. At LVO's. I wasn't there, so Vic, you can recount the story.
So I was sitting there, and someone came over, gave me 2 boxes of chocolates, said thank you to me and Dave, and I took the chocolates, and before I could ask him, like, what's your name, like, what's up, and he just ran away. So if you are listening to this episode, please just drop us a shout, drop us a message, and we can maybe give you a little shout out on the next episode. And thank you. That was chocolate covered almonds, and they were immense.
Yeah, I had one last night, actually. It's super good. And, we had a great reception of the podcast in USA as well. I didn't really realize how far reach we had over there. But a lot of people were mentioning knew Vic and I from the podcast. And I think just because if you guys didn't go, Vic and I obviously hang out a lot in Vegas as well. We hang out together. We're really good friends. So a lot of people, I think, when they sort of see one of us, usually it's they know Vic, and then they put the two and two together. And, I think some guy even recognized us from our voices as we were crossing the road one time. Was like, "Oh, you guys, the guys
Yeah,
from
just
40K?"
turned around. It's like, I know that voice.
Yeah, so it's really cool to see. It's really special, and it's good to see that we've got a nice international reach there.
For sure, man.
So, without further ado, let's crack into LVO. I'm going to go first because basically the most positive part of the event happened before we actually played any games. If you guys were aware, Anthony and I had well, of course you are because you're a listener and you would have listened to the previous episode, where Anthony and I had a bet for a steak dinner where I had to 20-0 Anthony, and if I didn't, I had to buy him a steak dinner, which of course was never going to happen. I'm never going to 20-0 Anthony in, I think, any format across any armies. But what I did was I took some of our listener advice, and big shout out to Nurgle Matthew as well, who kind of helped arrange this. We took some advice and got in contact with Joe from Wargames Live, who is an absolute legend in the community. I think that people don't really appreciate how awesome of a person Joe is, and I think Joe has had a huge impact on the community, especially the streaming community, and growing our game. So, on a side note, a huge shout out to Joe because he's an amazing human being. But then Anthony and I and Joe, I was kind of pushing like, hey, if we're going to do this exhibition match, let's try stream it. Let's try raise some money for charity. So Joe and I came up with the Canines for Warriors, which is raising money for rescue dogs, pairing up with U.S. military veterans to counteract depression. And look, just the community absolutely turned out. I was fully expecting to raise about $200. And some guy, I think his name was John, dropped a $500 donation before we had even deployed our armies. And we ended up raising $3,500 for charity, and I happily had to pay Anthony's dinner tab at Mamafuku in Las Vegas after that. But I was just completely blown away by the community. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me how awesome everyone is that plays the game. I think sometimes we get a little bit hell bent on some of the bad apples, but it's just really important to remember it's very few in between all the just amazing people that are not just great 40k players or great hobbyists, but are just really good human beings in general, and really want to see everyone do well. So big shout out to, if you donated, if you got involved in that stream, a huge shout out to you. We had an absolute blast. I would love to do something similar again. And that was probably, I think after that, I even said to Vic, I was like, look, after that, after we just had such an amazing success, doesn't really matter how I did in the tournament. Of course it mattered, but I felt like I'd already achieved something there, so that was really lucky.
What Dave is failing to mention there is just how crazy this actual game of 40k was. So you can check it out on Wargames Live. It should be on YouTube there, and there's essentially people could donate money and change the rules of the game a little bit. So I won't spoil every single rule change, but they were insane. I'll give you probably one example is potentially. Anthony's Abaddon got swapped with your Ahriman. That kind of stuff. So there was some crazy stuff, and it was such a laugh. It was such a great start.
There may have been a Bane sword somewhere in that game as well, despite none of us playing guard. So, and the best part is Anthony and I are all on player mics, so it's a great row between Noga, Matthew, Joe, Anthony, and myself, just playing an absolutely ridiculous game. And Anthony and I were like, there's so many rules that get stacked up, and Anthony and I were both trying to play by every single rule, so yeah, it was crazy. There may or may not have been a live Shui on stream for some cash.
That's it.
So that was great.
I mean, I want to talk about the actual LVO event and maybe give our listeners a little bit of background, because this episode, ideally, we've taken some feedback and we'd like to share some of our kind of tactical thoughts on the game and things that we can take forward into Arcs of Omen and the new meta based on our experiences at the event. So LVO is a little bit different to most of the events that we usually play in the UK, and the main thing is that it's a player-placed terrain, so a PPT event. And at this event, there's about 7 or 8 different kind of preset sets of terrain. And this set of terrain will be split into 2, and then each player has to deploy them, alternating with who drops the first piece down. Now, the quality of these terrain sets are very different, and the density of them is very different as well.
I think the quality is similar. In that most of them are quite poor, because either some of them are extremely dense or some of them are extremely open. And I don't think it's fair to say that even the ones that are dense are good terrain sets, in my opinion.
Sure. So we came in, we landed on a Tuesday. The event starts on a Friday. Dave's charity match is on a Thursday. We go in on Wednesday night and we walk past this massive space marine, like a real size space marine. We go into
Yeah,
the
that's right.
hall and the hall is looking beautiful. There's such a good buzz in there. We walked past a couple of guys and we asked them, oh, you guys are going to help set up the train tomorrow? And they were like, yeah, yeah. And I said, how are you guys going to set up the train? And they told us, the first 200 tables or so are going to be like what they consider the good terrain. And then the rest of the boards will be the other ones, kind of like the less good terrain in their view. But it didn't quite work out like that, did it, Dave?
It certainly didn't. So when we got there on Thursday, what they had done is effectively shuffled all of the tables to be completely randomized terrain across all of the tables from top to bottom. Now, it's important to note that this is a huge differentiation from the previous LVO, where they specifically locked the top 100 tables and the stream tables to be one set of terrain. So if you're a top player, you could dependently play on that single piece of terrain and practice on that piece of terrain. Now, there was a community announcement, I'm pretty confident there was, that this would also happen again this year. And I think among the top players, this was 100% expected, specifically because some of the terrain sets are horrifically bad. Like, it's not a fun player experience to play on some of those terrain sets for either players. So it would make sense to a certain degree that some of the tables would be that they would repeat the same thing as last year.
So I want to add in one more point to this, which was the rules pack showed all the different terrain sets that could be played, or at least that's what we thought. But when we actually reached the event and we saw all the mixed up terrain everywhere, there was one board which was different, and there was quite a large number of them. And this was a sisters table. Now, this sisters table had 3 massive pieces of terrain that were fully line of sight blocked. We weren't told about this terrain set before we got there, so we couldn't prepare for it. And a bit of a spoiler for later, but every single one of the top 8 games was played on that heavy piece of terrain.
Yep.
That is completely meta-skewing and completely changes the decisions on the armies that we make. It would be a huge advantage if anyone knew about that terrain set, and obviously we have no such knowledge. So we're walking in to a completely different situation to what we'd prepared for.
And what I would say is there were also, in addition to that sisters terrain set, there were other terrain sets that weren't in the player pack either. For example, a friend of mine was told to play in a different conference room on GW terrain. I mean,
Brutal.
Okay, yeah. So, sometimes you draw that one, right? So yeah, that's definitely an interesting. It's a bit of an eye opener going into Thursday. But I think Friday morning we rock up and we meet Adrian, who's a part of the
Tabletop Titans. We met 2 Adrians in that day. So we met one Adrian who is one of the German WTC hopefuls. He runs a YouTube channel, it's German, I think it's Kings of War, something like that. And he kind of found me in the queue and he was like, hey, are you Vic? And I was so happy because nobody knew me while I was queuing up, and I'm not used to this going to events. Usually I have friends everywhere. And he just chatted with me the whole time while I was queuing up. And he said, look, do you mind doing an interview? We did a little interview and then grabbed you for one as well, didn't he, Dave?
Yeah, and the most important thing I said in that interview was that I think I should have played a simpler army because, and this is before I took my loss, because I was beginning to get really worried after seeing all the difference in terrain that I would have to account for terrain and play a very difficult army and do that on top of jet lag. And lo and behold, that's more or less how I lost my game as well. So that's an interesting little forecast that I think going into LVO beforehand, I think I was really positive about my army choice. Yeah. But when I kind of got there in the heat of the moment, I thought, okay, I might be overreaching.
I think when we turned up on Friday morning, I don't know about you, but I know I was definitely a little bit shaken and anxious because the previous day, I kind of got a very negative sense of the way that everything was being organized. There were a lot of people who'd come in and they'd volunteered to set up the terrain and help out. And then in exchange for being able to kind of like practice a little bit on the tables, get a test game in. Yeah. And some of the organizers, so the FLG staff, were really kind of like quite aggressive, telling people, "It's okay, look, guys, it's time to get out of the room," and just shouting at us and kind of like treating us a little bit like cattle.
Yeah, that was a little bit disappointing. I think.
And I think I realized at that moment, like this is how this is gonna be. This is how this works over here. and
Yeah.
it really put me off, to be honest. But we move, we carry on, and
Yeah.
we hit it.
So that's on
Yeah.
Thursday. What I would say is that's a bit of a contrast from last year because I know on Facebook they also asked whether or not you'd be able to play some games on Thursday, and that was true because Games Workshop had an announcement to make later on that night. However, I'm kind of unsure as to how much preparation they really needed there because it seemed like they were kicking people out about 5 hours before it
Yeah, it
actually
was like a
happened. So
6 hour gap until the announcement.
yeah, so
So
that was a little
yeah.
bit bizarre. Sorry, guys, there'll be quite a few tangents on this episode. I think. Luckily enough, I didn't get kicked out because Anthony and I had the stream game, so that was fortunate enough for me as well. So I guess question, Vic, what time did you wake up in the morning on Friday?
Really early. So I woke up about 5 a.m. On the
Five
Friday,
a.m. Yeah,
which adds
yeah,
up with the jet lag.
yeah. So I think I woke up about 5 a.m. on the Friday as well, which I didn't really take into account at the time, but I figured, okay, that's not too bad. But you're bright awake at 5 in the morning is not the best time to play
But at
just
least that means we're kind of midday when the first round's hitting us. And,
yeah.
my first round is actually a good example of the terrain because it's a little bit
Hmm.
funny. Let me just get this up so I have his list. Yeah. So I played against actually a British guy called Simon
Yeah.
Chatterley. And he was playing Leagues of Votan army. And I thought, great, I'm playing T-Suns, Leagues of Votan. They hate mortal
Yeah.
wounds, right? I walk up to my table. I look at the terrain. And I'm like, okay, this terrain looks a bit suspicious. I'm going to find which one it is in the rules pack because some of this has to be first floor line of sight blocking because that was their big
Yeah.
announcement. Some of the ruins would be first floor line of sight blocking. I
Yeah.
couldn't find it in the rules pack. I asked my opponent and he was like, I have no idea as well. Let's go get a judge. I got the judge over and then he was like, look guys, this isn't in the rule pack. There's also an uneven number of terrain pieces. So I'm just gonna split it like this. You can have this half, you can have this half. So he got one extra ruin. And then I asked him, okay, cool. So are any of these first floor line of sight blocking? And he said, no, none of them are. So I'm on this board where every single ruin has windows in it. So it's completely open and it has nice big bases. So I can't even go close to them. and yeah, so essentially it's an entirely open board playing my first round against Votan. If I go second, it's just game over, which is an
Yeah.
awful thing to. It's like really weird, right?
Not
It's not
really what you
great.
want to fly 11 hours to go and
Yeah,
get.
the thing was, I went first, and obviously he can't hide anything either. So I just
Yeah.
kill what I can, and he can't really keep up from there. So anyone can take a loss like this. Like even Jack
Anyone
Jack
can take a
Hopster
loss.
won a game. Imagine he was playing on my table against Votan or Tau, and he went second.
Yep.
It's over. Like he lost the first
It's
round.
over.
So
Yep. Well, my first round was Eric Forsman, who's a Team America kind of like prospect, playing the mirror matchup. So I was like, oh, okay, straight in round one. It was a really good game. Fortunately, my list was a lot better suited in the mirror. I had way more Rubik Marines. He also had quite a few characters, and I took Sorcerer's Prowess and basically 15 on that. Lovely guy, though. But I was also playing on a terrible piece of terrain that had a huge, one of those big ruins in the middle that you had to move.
mhm.
So between that and placing your actual terrain, uh, it was very difficult. Like, I don't actually legitimately think I could place all my terrain by the rules pack, and we just had to agree to like put the forest or crate, like smash it in the back somewhere and just have it be completely irrelevant. And that, to be honest with you, happened in most of my games as well. I'll go from me round two because I got a great terrain story there.
Oh,
And I
have
think
you? Oh, so have I.
yeah. So I played against. I played against a really lovely guy called Da. And by the way, all my opponents this weekend were super lovely, really nice guys. I played against a guy called Da who was playing Quins, and we played on, I believe it's called the LVO Champs, and this is basically two rectangular polystyrene blocks with one enormous ruin. And when I say enormous, guys, my ruin was 17 inches in diameter. Like, it was incredibly massive. And the lip was huge. I had like 4 inches of lip between the ruin and the lip on one part. And I was like, okay. And then what I think was communicated, obviously really poorly, was that many people didn't know that the first floor was line of sight blocking. Because basically what happened, we played the game, it was super open, my opponent couldn't do anything, he kind of went, okay, I can't hide anything, I'm going to all in you turn one, and he's like, surely you won't kill 4 boats and 4 troop, and lo and behold, I killed 4 boats and 4 troop. And then after that I could teleport around and beat him, and then after the game I said, like, duh, why don't you just push everything into the ruin? And he said, well, it's all open. And I said, no, I'm pretty sure on this one, it's first floor line of sight blocking. And he was like, wow. And I said, man, I'm really sorry if you didn't know that. I kind of assumed that you knew that. So that's, I think, a common theme throughout many, many, many of my games is that no one was actually sure about the rules of all the terrain. And I think in a lot of games, people just sort of went, what do we think is fair? And kind of winged it like that. I don't know. Did you have the same experience, Vic?
Well, no, my round two was against a lovely guy called Hector playing his Blood Angels. And Blood Angels is quite a good army against T-Suns. It's not such a great army if there is exactly the same kind of terrain setup as my first game. So we had asymmetrical terrain with which was extremely light. I went first, killed both units of Death Company, or more or less killed both units of Death Company, and the game's over. Like it's just a nothing game. And
By the way, which is a little tangent. Is this the terrain piece that has a huge like U-shaped vertical piece, industrial?
U-shaped vertical piece. I'm not sure. I wasn't playing on that one. I was playing again on another one because I was on table 472 for this one. I think they ran out of terrain pieces towards the higher numbers. So anything like 400 plus wasn't really in the rules pack. So I played my first one 412 and then 472. So
Like you did.
and yeah, it's completely random where you end up. So yeah, I played on this board, and I think Yokel. Yokel's the one who played on GW terrain, right? He played it in one of these rounds, but I think it was like 480 went into the other room.
Yeah, and the other room, by the way, guys, is like way down the conference. It's not close. Like, and there's no sign that says if you're above 480, it's in the room like 3 doors down.
Yeah.
So I think he had a little bit of stress, like trying to actually get to his game and find it.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, just got GW terrain, sure.
I mean, I think. Do you want to go for your next one, Dave? Was that an interesting one for you?
So my next game, I think, was maybe my favorite game, perhaps. Oh, it's really close. I played a guy called Dennis Love, who is like Eric Forsman, kind of in the peripherals of USA team. A super nice guy. He's playing Quins again, so I just got to take Wrath of Magnus for a free 15 again. We played on some better terrain, the Gothic Ruins, which is the old version. However, all the small ruins you could see right into, so it was like okay. We actually ended up finishing our game in about an hour and 15 minutes, and I said to Dennis, a super nice guy, I just said, Dennis, look, last game of the day, like, do you want to do a re-rack? And I think there's definitely some parts of your game you could really improve on, and I'd be happy to like just do a coaching session for an hour and a half, re-rack, and then we can play through kind of how it would do a lot better. And fundamentally, I just fixed the way that he did his terrain, and then we worked through his secondaries and how to play the game. And it was just a really nice way to end the day because I think Dennis really enjoyed it as well. And I got to learn a bit as well. So that was a really lovely game to end the day on.
My round 3 is the one where I'm going to go into a bit more detail. So
yeah.
I'm sorry if you guys haven't been able to follow exactly what we've been saying perfectly. It's been more about the terrain. But in this game, which is one that I played on stream against a guy called Alex Fennell, I wanted to go through my list and everything. So if you guys don't know, me and Dave's lists are very similar. We have very slight differences. So my one is a Thousand Suns Battalion with a Demon's Vanguard added onto it. The Demon's Vanguard includes Fate Skimmer, which is the Herald on a Chariot, and 3 units of Flamers, 5, 5, and 3. We're still using the old rules here, so Flamers is still extremely good. And then we had the T-Suns Battalion with Ahriman, an Exalted Sorcerer on disc, and we had an Infernal Master as well. 6 units of 5 rubrics, and a big brick of 10 Terminators. The only difference between our lists is that I had Fate Skimmer, and Dave instead had the Herald on foot, and found the points to add a Rhino into his list. Yep. I was playing against Alex Fennell. We'd come up to a table, and it was this table, with the massive kind of open like piece, hugely open piece, and industrial.
Yeah.
And I looked at Alex and I was like, dude, this is really bad. And he was like, yeah, it's pretty bad. That would have been a really easy game for me there. Instead, we got switched over to the stream, and the stream table was a much more interesting kind of terrain set. Now, Alex was playing Necrons. He was playing the OBSEC and pre-game move dynasty. So this is a very powerful point-scoring faction. Has very strong secondaries and great primary play. The mission you never want to play Necrons on is Data Scry Salvage, which has 4 objectives across the middle, a bonus for holding multiple objectives in the middle, and it's a hold 2 for 5 points kind of mission. This is really bad to kind of hit Necrons into. So I knew this was going to be tough from the get-go.
And it's bad because obviously Necrons can create a huge primary differential while still scoring massive secondary points. And I think in this matchup with T-Suns, you're basically even on secondaries on a good day. However, you really need to be able to push the Necrons and start tabling them really quick so they don't score as much primary. But the primary will be very similar just because of the mission itself, right?
So there's, in terms of points, I think the Necrons are slightly ahead on the secondaries, but not by a lot. On the primary, however, they have an incredible ability to knock the T-Suns player down to 4s without committing too much. Very fast-moving OBSEC. And then whoever goes second gets a big advantage because they hit a 12 at the end. So the other big thing that goes on with this player-placed terrain is the first drop. So the first drop of terrain, when there's particularly heavier like pieces of terrain or large pieces of terrain, can be quite instrumental in the outcome to games. And in this case, with 4 objectives across the middle, Alex did get the drop to win the roll to put the first piece of terrain down, and he put this massive line of sight blocking piece directly on 2 of the objectives.
It could cover both objectives.
Yeah, right towards the middle of the board. So
is this sorry to clarify, is this the Sisters terrain or the Gothic Ruin?
Gothic no, not even Gothic Ruins. It's the one older than that, the old school Gothic Ruins.
Yeah.
So he has this great board position, but I managed to set up my terrain, do everything, and now my entire game plan is, can I kill him quick enough? So we set up, I get first turn. So now I'm like, I have to kill him. Like I'm so far behind on points now. And I like teleport my Terminators over. I pick up like one entire flank. And I'm like, this is a great position now. I've removed an entire flank and I should be okay. And then he kind of has this big brick of destroyers who can do a lot of damage. They come over and they shoot my Terminators. They kill 7 Terminators. So quite a lot, which adds up. That's kind of what you would expect.
Really?
And then I trade. I don't trade. I just kill his destroyers back. So psychic powers plus a bit of shooting kills all of the destroyers. So now we're in a position where I have 3 Terminators. I've lost 7 Terminators in return for about 4 of his units, including his big brick of destroyers. Good position. Now, his second turn involves him throwing some Scorpic destroyers at me. He says at this point, look, Vic, I think I've just lost this game. I shouldn't have said anything here. But I told him, look, Alex, you are in a position where no matter what, it's going to be very tight on the points. Like, don't stop playing well here because it's going to be a really good game. And yeah, so he got his focus back and he went in, like he moved the Scorpic destroyers in, and he had the Silent King and the Scorpic destroyers right in front of me. Now, I made a massive error here, which was I split my firepower between the 2 units, when realistically I should have just cleared all of the Scorpic destroyers.
Yeah, I think Silent King is definitely one of those units where unless you're going to try and all in at one turn, it's better just to leave it alone.
In this particular list, the Silent King is not OBSEC. It doesn't matter like if he kills a Rubric squad off an objective. There'll be another one standing on there. And he can barely kill 1 Rubric squad a turn. But what happened was he had the Scorpic destroyers on my point. I failed to kill them. He has OBSEC, more OBSEC than me on there. I missed loads of spells down the other flank and end up not being able to take him off primary. And he got the swing of 12 and then put me down to 0. So this is not looking
Basically
good, man.
game at that
Not
point.
looking good. So I said, look, this is game. And then I was like, but you know what, Alex? I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep playing. So we kept playing this game out. And I just want to do a shout out here for Alex Fennell because some of you may not have heard of him, but he won the first LVO. He's consistently been a very good player, but he's kind of not one of the well-known names recently because he's not been playing so much recently. But he's a very, very good player. And this game was played with so much good sportsmanship. I didn't realize just how much of a good reputation he has, but I found out afterwards he's got the nickname The Saint. And he's been playing this game through a period where sportsmanship wasn't necessarily a priority. So, Alex, if you, I don't know if you listen to this, I might send this to him so he can listen to this. But it was a little bit inspirational for me. A very successful player,
really lovely guy,
playing the game in a very good way.
And he struck me as the type of person that just plays the game just for pure enjoyment of playing the game in and of itself, regardless of winning a tournament or rankings or ITC this or ITC that. He just basically was like, okay, I'm here to play, gonna have a fun game, you know.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, if you don't know this already, but his one of his friends' flights got changed and he had to drop from the tournament. So, I mean, that's the type of guy he is, right? He just comes in, crushes, has a good time, makes friends, is a really lovely guy, and then, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
can't play anymore, so it's all right.
So we played out this game. There were a couple of little things which went my way, a couple of little things which went his way, and he ended up with a 6-point win across the game. And that that last turn swing just got him over the edge there.
Crazy.
And yeah, so I'd lost my game there, and Alex didn't even know like I was ITC rank 1 going into the game. He was just a chill dude, just having a good game, and yeah, we shook our hands. I would thank you to everyone who like gave us really positive feedback on the stream as well. Like I'm glad people enjoyed that game because it was really fun. And at the end, we were just having a laugh, and he was showing me some of the tricks Necrons can do with an exploding scat. Like the game was already over at this point, but we were still like having a few little moments. So it was really fun. So thank you, Alex. I took my loss, and I was now out of the running for winning the LVO.
Yes, and I was 3-0 day one. Vic was 2-1 day one. But guys, LVO, I think we probably would have said this later on in the episode, but LVO now seems appropriate. LVO there's so much variance to it that between the opponents you face, the army that you're playing, the terrain that you end up on, there is so much variance that it is nothing like a normal UK tournament in so many regards. Where a UK tournament, you may steadily progress in player skill of the people that you play against. LVO is completely different. You might hit someone good, you might hit someone first couple of tournaments, you might be on great terrain, you might be on awful terrain. So between all that, it's very difficult to get a consistent run, I think, at LVO. There are some people that have managed it, but I also think that those people perhaps play in the USA a lot and have better knowledge about the tournament structure going into it than we do as well, for sure.
For sure, man.
So Thursday nights out, Vic and I go out to... No, we went out to the casino on Thursday. On Thursday night, I think. No, Friday night maybe.
Friday night.
But anyway, that was a good time. Vic had a lot to drink, and so did I. It was good times. At,
made some
Fremont
friends.
Street, so made a lot of friends. Yeah, it was good. Round 4, day 1. I come in. I've got Chaos Knights, and my board is horrific. I'm playing on. I believe the mission was Abandoned Sanctuaries, and I'm playing on a board where there is an enormous square-shaped piece of terrain right in the middle of the board. And on these ones, you have to move it adjacent to the objective. So basically, my opponent was playing Chaos Demons and Knights. And this middle piece of terrain had completely open windows. Just imagine it being a massive flat piece of area terrain. Like probably about 8 inches by 8 inches in a cuboidal shape. And more or less, my opponent could never go onto it because I could see everything in there. And in addition to that, I could go in there and get cover saves. And then also in addition to that, none of his monsters could charge me while I was in there because I just stood an inch off the ruin. So there was basically nothing my opponent could do. His whole army was also damage 1. So let's just say that game was quite quick for me. But what was your round 4 like?
I played against Sebastian, who was playing with Sisters. Now,
yep.
If anyone knows me, they know that I love the Sisters army, and it was really interesting to see the concept that he came with, which was actually quite a good counter to T-Suns. It was a sub-faction called Argent Shroud, which lets you advance and shoot as if you remain stationary. So he packed the list with loads of multi-melters. So he's advancing and shooting Retributors and Battle Sisters all over the place with multi-melters. And Ardent Shroud also has a 1 CP strat that when you suffer a mortal wound, you can gain a 4-up Feel No Pain against it for the rest of the phase. And his Priest Lady, the Dogmata, has a litany, which means that a friendly unit can't be targeted by psychic powers. So he has a lot of psychic defense if you wanted to play out and go for the front. Now, the thing is, and a thing I noticed amongst the mid-tables, which is where I was sitting at this tournament, and comparing it to the UKTC, is that I think because of how concentrated the UKTC is in terms of skill level, everyone improves so much. So you find that no matter where you are in the tournament, people are playing quite tight. They understand how the flow of the game goes. And I found a little bit in LVO that people were much more likely just to hang their units out. Like they would put their units in space without really considering hiding things behind terrain. I don't know if that's a symptom of terrain or a symptom of lack of pressure from lack of competition. But in this case, Sebastian, like, he gave me a chance in a matchup where I probably shouldn't win it, just by leaving a lot of units exposed across the board. So the level of attrition that he was suffering just from my shooting, not really my psychic powers, was a bit too much. So it ended up like about turn 3 that he just had a small handful of units left. Whereas if he had tucked all his units behind the wall, played it a bit more slower, excellent passive secondary game for the sisters. We were also on a decent terrain set. That's the one that we practiced on.
Yep.
So there was definitely space to hide. He probably could have taken me to a very close game, and realistically, you'd have him favored to win this game.
Yep. Yeah, I remember us talking the night before saying, actually, this list looks pretty tough. It's got a good shooting element to it, psychic defense, and most importantly, just had secondaries where you could probably out-secondary the Thousand Suns player.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. Which goes on to my game, the game that I lost.
Oh, no.
Man, I had an excellent game. So just for context, this is why I asked this question before. I got up bright awake at 3:30 in the morning this morning on about 6 hours sleep.
Yeah.
So by my standards, not very good. I'm not going to make excuses though. I went into this game like super confident because I had just taken Wrath of Magnus for like the last 4 games and scored 15s on it, and I saw that I could take it again. Was like, man, Wrath of Magnus, free game. Lo and behold, this player Chase actually knew who I was because I played one of his teammates, Carl Perry, in LGT. We had a fantastic game, which was lucky because this game I was playing very poorly. I was making play mistakes all over the place, and I'm super lucky that I had the benefit of the doubt. Chase kind of knowing that I was supposedly a good person, and that what I was trying to do wasn't being disingenuous, because I'm not going to lie, guys, I was making some serious play mistakes, like double casting with a unit, and then like needed to take back my movement and stuff like that. Chase was a super lovely guy about it. So he was playing Yanari, and we were actually playing the board that we could practice on TTS. So not too bad. I think the mission was quite good for him. We were playing, it was either Conversion or Death and Zero, one of the corner deployment ones. And in hindsight, I think I got the first terrain drop, but I probably misplayed that terrain piece slightly. I should have, I went for the block in the middle, which wasn't bad, but I could have placed my side piece a little bit better as well. Or I should have just left that one open, perhaps. But as the game goes, I went super aggressive on turn 1, and he actually got to teleport his Incarn to a place where I couldn't then teleport my Terminators in and shoot it, which put me in a really precarious position, because then I basically had 2 of my characters down the very bottom end of the corner. He had taken Assassinate, so I had to teleport my Terminators there just to make sure my characters didn't die. And as far as I'm concerned about the list, having your Terminators die is kind of okay, because it's really the characters that are the powerhouses in the list. A character will often do way more damage depending on the matchup than a Terminator will. But he comes in, Hemlock comes right into my deployment zone, does a bunch of mortals with the spell, I don't deny it. Falcon comes down the back of my deployment zone, makes a 7-inch charge with the Banshees with the Auto 6, and then Baharoth comes in and shoots. Support platforms, which I totally brain farted, didn't know that they got blast. Max shots my Terminators. Incarn goes into my Terminators. I think I only lost about 4 though, because I had the free reroll and a security reroll for the support weapons. And the Incarn actually doesn't do, like, it sounds really bad, but when you're -1 to hit and have the 4 up invulnerable, actually the support weapons and shooting out of line of sight hit on 5s, and the Incarn hits on 3s as well with basically no reroll. So it's not too bad. But the game just really kind of starts slipping away from me there. There was even one turn where, this was the next turn actually, I said, all right, I'm going to kill the Incarn. Oh, actually, in addition to that, his Solitaire comes and charges my Araman, and Araman lives there, which I think on average probably works out that he lives, but it's definitely swingy. And even in that very point in the moment, I said, all right, Chase, I'm gonna psychic off your Incarn. That's fine. And then I'll Temporal Surge my Araman, move over here, Cinches Firestorm, smite this stuff off, my Flames will come down, do all this. I begin smiting the Incarn, and then for some reason my brain just completely melts, and then I psychic off another unit in my deployment zone, and he teleports the Incarn. I'm like,
oh, damn it.
Come on, man. I even rat the Solitaire so he can teleport there, and just stuff like that. It really doesn't usually happen with me. And look, going into the game, I was too confident. I was way too aggressive. I didn't respect Chase or his list anywhere near as enough. Chase was a really solid player. Really played it really well. he definitely knew what he was doing with all the terrain as well, which I think was wound out really good against him. I think his list actually on that terrain set, especially the one that we hit, was really well tuned because he could scout the enemy behind line of sight, had the D cannons where he could shoot all the objectives, and had the 10-man troop where he could advance and go onto objectives. So I actually think his list, that Yanari list was a really good choice there.
Nice.
But overall, just got completely outplayed. And that was what I said at the table too. Because Chase's teammates were all around watching and stuff, and our game went to time, so everyone was watching. I said, "Look, Chase, like you played so well. Congratulations. I just didn't respect you anywhere near as much as I should." And it's a good lesson to have that sometimes, to be humbled like that. I wasn't too shaken up about it though.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah,
it was still like a for me, having those really good games is just as important these days as winning. And had a great time.
Anyway. Yanari's a good one to learn like that as well because it's got so many tricks in it. It's a really, really cool faction. So yeah, I'm sure you learned a lot off the back of that one.
Yeah. And then my round 6, pretty relaxed. I played against basically Vic's iteration of Emperor's Children. Played that on the Scouring. My opponent Austin was really lovely, but he didn't move out fast enough, and that was where I was just going to beat him. Then he had to move out, and then I could get the jump on him with my entire army. So that was a pretty straightforward game. And how was your round 6?
My round 5, I don't want to skip that one because I played against Nicholas Olsen Johnson, who's from the Best in Faction, the New Generation podcast, and he's also a very good player. So this was probably, like, in terms of technical skill, I think Nick was probably the best player I played against, and he's very talented. Now, he was playing a Votann here, and he's played a very good Votann list. Kind of double Land Fortress, triple Berserkers, 2 units of Bikes, and 3 units of Warriors. The negative of his list is that he is running a Grimnir. I did listen to his podcast before he came to the event, and he's kind of umming and ahhing about the Grimnir. But he ended up going for it, which is a negative in the Thousand Suns matchup, because it opens up a secondary called Wrath of Magnus, where you cast some spells, but the enemy needs to have a Psyker in their list. Now, another disadvantage was we did roll up the Sisters terrain on this one. So, had extremely heavy terrain against this Votann army of Nick's. So, Nick had practiced this game quite a bit. So, he had some experience and he knew his win condition in this game if the T-Suns played the game properly. He went into this assuming that I would play it correctly, and he went for it. So, he went first, he moved everything forward, like absolutely as far as he could. He was about 3 or 4 inches from my army on the front line with all of his bikes, and his land fortresses were sitting behind. And essentially the plan was see what he could survive with. Hopefully the bikes catch all the psychic powers, and the berserkers can come out and punch stuff and just pin me into my deployment zone long enough that he can eventually win the game.
That's right. It's completely the right way to play.
Yeah, and I hadn't tested this approach. Like when we were playing with Votann, I hadn't done this, what he was doing, quite so aggressively. So I was like, whoa, what's going on here? I have no idea how this game plays out now. I ended up teleporting my Terminators. And what I found was with this Thousand Sun spells is that there are enough targeted spells that you can ignore the bikes and shoot over into a single land fortress. And between Gaze of Hate, Zinch's Firestorm, 2 Bolts of Change, you can actually do enough mortal wounds to kill a land fortress. Yep. So I killed 1 land fortress purely from mortal wounds, and then I shot 1 unit of Berserkers fully dead. I killed both units of bikes, and now that's all I could do. So the rest of his army is still alive.
That's a lot, though.
I've killed maybe a third of his army here. And then he hits me back. Like, he tags everything up. He kills, I think, 9 out of 10 Terminators with his 1 land fortress and a few Berserkers. And then I just have to dig him out. But the way it kind of worked out was that he did run out of stuff by about turn 4. And he ended up getting tabled right at the end of the game. So the final score was 97-68, but it doesn't do justice to just how well Nick played that game. I know he's Team USA hopeful, and I have a feeling like they will definitely pick a player of that caliber. So best of luck to you, Nick, if you're listening to this.
Best of luck. And round 6?
Round 6 was against Brian. Brian brought some Tau. Brian had a custom sept. So this is an interesting one that I think we might see more of. It's one where you get +1 strength if you're within 12 inches, and you get plus one. No, you ignore light cover if you're within 12 inches. So we had all of these burst cannons on crisis suits where if you just go right up to them, they all have multi-trackers. You just get loads of exploding sixes, ignore cover, and just like drown them in weight of dice. Now, Brian hasn't, I don't think he's played this game against T-Suns before. And what essentially happened was he got a little bit stuck because he's quite an intelligent player, but the purely passive game ended up happening where if he went for me, I would kill him. So we ended up just counting up the points. The first 3 or 4 turns, like we did almost nothing to each other. And then he moved forward just a little bit, and I just killed everything. I just went for it. So ended up winning that one and taking it for 5-1.
Yeah, so both finished 5-1. I think I dropped not many points.
Yeah, you did really
I think
well.
I may have been top of the 5-1 bracket, perhaps.
You were,
Like
I think you were
14th
like
or something.
second or something. So you were like 17th, and I was 26th or something like
That's
that.
right. Yeah, with about 15 undefeated players and some draws and whatnot there as well, I think. Which at the awards ceremony, Vic ended up getting ranked 2 in the whole of ITC, which is still, I remember telling you at the time, like I think you look back on this thing, it's a massive accomplishment.
Yeah,
still.
that's decent run. And I think you got fourth there, Dave.
Got 4th overall, yeah. So a good run for us. And I said to Vic as well, I said, it's not bad for 2 guys that just host a podcast, 2nd and 4th in the world.
Oh, yeah, the rankings are up, actually.
Are they up?
Yes, so Jack Hopster ended up winning the ITC by about 30 points. So he got 1556 points. And then me and Mike Porter, there's only 4 points between us. That was close.
Really close.
So yeah, me and Mike Porter are both in the 1520s. And then, Dave, there's about a 50-point drop down to you, actually, from there.
Yep.
And you came in 4th. And then there's a 30-point drop down to our hero, Nassim Fushane.
Nassim got 5th.
Nassim got 5th. So Nassim smashed it, actually. Getting 5th there is quite a big jump for him.
Yep. Yeah, he had 2 great showings in LGT and at LVO as well.
So do you know what that means, Dave? It means that out of the top 5 in the ITC, 4 of us from the UK. Glorious.
Just one American. We'll get him next time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually Ogden jumped Lennon as well there. So Lennon went down to 7th.
Right. Yeah. Yes. I think some takeaways. Let's just zoom out a little bit. Talk about the LVO as a whole. I think there is... Well, this will probably be a little bit of a rant.
Okay, let's do it.
As you might have already picked up, there is a common theme for this tournament. I think what makes LVO special is that it's the last event of the year. It's the event where everyone is going to push the most, and because it's the last event of the year, it has so many eyes on it. I think if LVO was in the middle of the year, it wouldn't get anywhere near as much attention, perhaps, as it would, especially from international players as well. But it is at the end of the year. It kind of caps the season off. They do run it at a really good venue. Like I think the Rio is a great venue. Playing in the hall is really good. Las Vegas is kind of a magical city to play it in because of the environment that it's in. I've been to Las Vegas a ton of times by now. I'm not the massivest fan of it in general, but it is a fun resort type of place to go and play Warhammer. And between those 2 elements, I think those are the 2 really big positives for the LVO. Another one may be that it has a convention center, and there are a lot of other games that get played there as well. I think the overall sportsmanship was really good as well, and I think the favorite thing I had seen perhaps was the Age of Sigmar players. If you're an Age of Sigmar player listening to this, you may know of the team. I believe they're called Tough Crowd, who were absolutely chanting. It doesn't matter if it was 40k rewards or Age of Sigmar reviews; they were chanting like no tomorrow. And they just kind of struck. I think a lot of the Warhammer people said, "Man, we're playing the wrong game." They look like they're having an absolute blast. But I think, and one way I'd mention this at LVO is that LVO strikes me as an.
Go for a sec. Okay, hello.
We're back.
All right, where were we?
I'm just going to start the rant.
Are you going to do the rant again? All right,
Start the
I'm
rant.
ready.
I'll take it from the essay analogy.
Okay.
Yeah, so for me, Las Vegas Open is it's kind of like a great essay where it makes a lot of fundamental points and it brings a lot of rawness to the table, but it's kind of riddled by just silly, childish grammatical errors. I think there are a lot of things that we take just for granted here in the UK that are automatically done by de facto, that if they weren't done, we immediately notice. I think the largest takeaway from that would have to be the terrain. I think the terrain was... Look, if we're being honest, it was very poor. It's very difficult to say that the terrain was even of an acceptable caliber coming from the UK, and that's not to discredit Frontline Gaming or Las Vegas Open, but it's certainly the community in the UK and I think Europe as well with WTC has certainly elevated to a level that is simply beyond LVO. And I think if those boards as a litmus test were used in UK or Europe, I think would just be flat out called it unacceptable. Really, what do you think, Vic?
It's a tough one because you see, I don't mind if the event had bad terrain, right? Mm-hmm. As long as there is some kind of evidence that they consider that a problem, the people who are organizing the event, I'd be okay with that. Mm-hmm. But I genuinely believe that the organizers of the event think that they've run a really good event. And realistically, this is probably one of the worst events I've been to from a purely competitive perspective. Mm-hmm. It was kind of organized really badly when we were inside the hall. I mentioned about staff members being rude to us. Mm-hmm. The terrain was ridiculous, and it created an environment where you have this kind of key event for determining the outcome of who the best player in the world is. Mm-hmm. And you've just completely compromised that by introducing so many random elements. Mm-hmm. And not just that, it's fine if you have a few bad terrain sets, but the conscious decision to then mix them up across all the tables means that you just don't care. It's not important.
It delegitimizes the event to a certain extent, doesn't it?
100%. It's just completely down to a dice roll on... we're used to dice roll on your pairings. Mm-hmm. But dice roll on your pairings plus the table you're playing on.
And the first drop as well.
And the first drop of terrain.
Three.
And then you've got first turn on top of that. This is too many variables there. Yeah. And then you set the terrain on a new terrain set, which no one has ever seen, which is ultra dense for all of the top 8 tables.
Yeah. And just a clarification, guys. This is the densest table I've ever seen in my life. It makes Vanguard Tactics U-shaped ruins look like a light board. The Sisters U-shaped ruin is not even a U. It's basically an oval with one small door to get into, and it's enormous. And it's completely line of sight blocking on the first floor. You can hide 1,700 points of Thousand Suns in there, reasonably comfortably.
So, my positive is, so this is all directed towards FLG. Mm-hmm. I think my positive is that FLGN, so their network, were actually great throughout the event. The way that they kind of communicated, they ran the stream, they did everything. They introduced active judging to the stream as well. Yep. I think all of those things were done really nicely on their end. And I do have a lot of respect for FLG because I was there during the time that ITC revolutionized 40K. Mm-hmm. But there is a certain standard that you have to keep up with nowadays in modern competitive 40K to actually make the game a competitive game. And LVO is a number of steps backward on that path. Yeah. I think the UKTC, the WTC, they've done huge jumps forward with this. And LVO just takes it all back to those rubbish events we had to deal with 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. It's difficult to point to something that LVO has improved on year, from my experience from last year to this year. And I'm not just being salty because I went 5-1 this year and I got 5th last year. If I look back at the play experience, I also had to deal with so much those random elements. I was just playing a way better army that didn't have to care about it. So I think both you and I would have said, actually, after this event, we should have just played an army that was almost indifferent to so many of these random dice rolls.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, to be fair, both of us knew that the top eight tables were playing on a very heavy terrain set,
Yeah.
and we both knew that it was completely randomized across all of the other tables.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't have gone for Thousand Suns. Like,
Wouldn't
there's
have
no
played it.
chance. It
There's
would have
no
been
chance. There's no chance of us winning in the top eight with Thousand Suns on
yeah.
the sisters terrain. Doesn't it almost
We
doesn't
would have
matter what
lost.
we hit. We could even lose to Tau on that board. I mean, it completely changes the army that you want to bring, especially for someone like Vic, who's in the position of winning the entire ITC and with the full expectations of getting in the top eight. It's a tough one. Vic, would you come back?
Oh, definitely not. No, unless there's like an obvious and clear change. But even then, I probably wouldn't trust them to do that. That's the thing. Like, the entire organization from before the event, up to the event, and during the event has been an absolute disaster. And, I like all the guys individually, but they need to massively step up their game. And I wouldn't be surprised if LVO is not the largest event in the world next year. And, the LGT was considerably better than the LVO this year. And I think we're going to see a lot of... Because the thing is, this is a big thing I noticed. The people who traveled from Europe and other parts of the world to attend this event all had similar complaints about it. Everyone I've talked to. A large proportion of the American players are just absolutely used to this. And the thing is, this isn't how competitive 40k is played in other parts of the world. It's played like as a proper competitive kind of game.
With reproducible results to a certain extent, right?
Exactly. And you go into a game knowing that it's your player skill that's going to win you the game, not just like I hit the right board at the right time against the right opponent.
Yeah, and I think the cornerstone of this is Ennis Wilson, who played on the industrial base as Tyranids. Ennis Wilson took Best in Faction Tyranids, is an amazing player, 2-time Super Major winner over here. Played against, with all due respect, not a well-known and named player playing Tau, and got absolutely rinsed off the board in, I think, 2.5 turns. Like, how is that an acceptable game state and I think he lost by like 50 points or something, right? Like, how is that an acceptable way to play the game where you can travel from Europe or UK, regardless of where you travel from, but you can rock up to a table, have a random element of you got this terrain set, which functionally some of these terrain pieces, guys, are enormous. They're the size of a rugby ball, but they have zero impact on the board. And I'm not just saying that for argument's sake. Zero impact. You step into them, they're fully open. Like, they're square, so they don't even line of sight block. And then you have to place them around the table to actually fit all your other terrain in. So, yeah, I mean, I feel really bad for Innes as well. And case in point, my opponent that bet me on a game that went to time on, arguably a decent set of terrain, then played against Nassim on industrial base that Innes lost on.
Poor guy.
And he lost in 15 minutes. And Nassim absolutely blew him off the board in 15 minutes. How was that? And obviously that guy is a really good player, Chase. But it's like, how is it that he goes from playing me to Nassim, goes to time and has a great game, and then loses in 15 minutes on another board?
And then, you know what happened? And then we went into the top 8. No, we went into the shadow round. And both Jack Harpster and Mike Porter, both brilliant players. They're both playing melee-ish armies, Jack's on Blood Angels, won the event, and Mike lost in the semi-finals, but he was playing Harlequins. They both paired into Tau on extremely heavy Sisters terrain.
Yeah.
Like, the complete swing, if that was one round earlier and they were on the industrial terrain, they both lose the game.
Yeah,
But
and it's not really even a question at that point, is it? Like, I know Jack feels the same way as well, is that if you hit an open board with Blood Angels, like, I'm sorry, man. The player doesn't have to be an astounding player to point their cyclic ions at you and shoot you, right?
Yeah, that's it. You just can't face that level of attrition, especially, on an open board. So, yeah, it's...
Times are changing, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think next season, like, the experience during LVO is going to impact next season's attendance for events. And I hope that it does generally just improve the quality of events in America. Like, if anyone from FLG is listening to this, can just, like, take the feedback and consider that, you probably lost a number of players from the UK from ever attending one of your events, unless there's changes.
But it's gotten to the point where it's very difficult to even believe the changes would happen, even if they were announced. Like, I think one big point is that in the UK, you know what you're getting. And like you said earlier, Vic, is that even if you know what you're getting is subpar, at least that's what your expectations meet reality, right?
Right, and the
However,
execution is done correctly as well. Sorry to interrupt
yeah,
there. Just on that point, quickly, just like the execution is done correctly.
mm-hmm.
In this event, we were told the first floors will be line of sight blocking on ruins.
Yep.
And like I was like, cool, that's great. So that means even the rubbish terrains will be good.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go into the rules pack and you see that it's just like one piece of terrain on each map.
Yeah. And I think the judging quality is kind of, I know the judges have a tough job and I feel bad about to critique them, but there were a lot of differentiation in judge calls as well. And I think the call that you got at the end of the day might have coin flipped on what judge came to the table. And I think a lot of times they stuck to the pack, which is, it's a fair way to play it, but there's clearly a lot of times where, look, it's sure this is the pack, but like, I mean, come on, man. Like, we all play Warhammer, right? Like, surely this is not how it's going to be. Lo and behold, that's what it's like.
Even small, like, quality of life things, like in the UKTC events, the judges will walk from one end of the room to the other and repeat that process, usually with the judges walking in opposite directions. So there's always a judge kind of within line of sight. In this event, if I wanted a judge, I would have to look at, they're all concentrated at the front of the room. So I'd have to walk all the way to the front of the room, take, 10 minutes to go there and back. And
or just shout extremely loudly, which happened to me about 3 times.
Yeah,
it's
like
it's
that.
a tough one. It really makes me take for granted what we have here in the UK. I think the consistency, the standard, both of the communities I think are really good people. I would say that's the most consistent thing across it. A lot of great sportsmanship, I think, at the event.
Sure.
But it's the execution, really, at the end of the day, isn't it? Like the framework which they operate in, UK is better, far superior, and the execution is a mile between them two. I think that, I mean, I think Zach could do very well running a circuit in the United States.
For sure.
I think it wouldn't take long to. I think they've had the monopoly there for a little while, and I think that I think players would flock to events that could offer something around consistency, around terrain, competitiveness, and execution as well.
And I think it's a big part of why the Games Workshop events are doing so well in America. Obviously, Games Workshop events do tend to be popular, but I've also heard that they're extremely well organized.
Yep.
Now, I would say that the Games Workshop terrain set is probably not the big selling point of the Games Workshop events. It's the quality of how the events are run.
Yep.
And that's a massive learning point for tournament
Just
organizers
goes to
going
show, right?
forward.
It turns out that the fundamental thing that impacts the game, i.e. terrain, has almost the most largest player impact experience, right?
For sure.
Who would have thought, right? So anyway, that's guys,
Rant.
we could unload for probably another 2 hours, but needless to say, I don't think even me who had played last year, I don't think I would be back again next year, which is it's tough to say. I would love to, and I think it's going to happen. Some of the US people and some of the international community come and travel to the UK, whether it's a large event or if it's even a normal one, just a normal 2-day or a 3-day. I definitely encourage you to come. Or look, if you're a frontline gaming member or if you're a TO, try and maybe get in contact with some of the UK top players and then ask. You will get a great reception. What do you think is important to run my event? Like, I'm thinking about this. Like, what should I adjust? Or this is my pack. I'm sure either Vic and I would be absolutely open to discuss it as well. And, on that point, we do have regular discussions within the UKTC community around how the tournament could be improved. I think that's a huge hallmark of difference between the UK and the US as well, right? Is that repetitive, cyclical feedback and year-on-year improvement, and event-on-event improvement, right?
Yeah, I mean, we receive a survey at the end of every single event. You can always message the people organizing the event. There are quite a few different contacts you can go to. And the terrain pack is constantly adjusting and improving. It's actually significantly improved now from when we started. So, yeah, there's a lot of room for, I think, other events to learn. But it's just a shame that it has to be LVO, the largest premium event in the world, that is the one that needs to improve. So, yeah.
Interesting. We'll leave it for next time, guys.
Yeah.
We could rant over, but we're actually going to shoot off, record another episode. So thank you for listening to the Fireside episode 12. We've got good things coming this year, and we'll catch you on episode 13. Thank you for listening to the 40k Fireside podcast. Vic and I hope you've enjoyed listening, and we greatly appreciate any feedback that you can provide after the show.